Good evening. This is the public forum for public input regarding the Therapeutic Cannabis Program Dispensary proposed here in Merrimack. My name is Nancy Harrington. I'm the chair of the Merrimack Town Council. I'm only going to be doing introductory comments, and once I introduce the head honcho over there, Jake Leon, he will be taking over the forum. I just want to be able to make a couple of introductory comments. The Therapeutic Cannabis Program is a legislative initiative established by statute RSA 126-X, which is designed to provide relief to individuals with serious medical conditions by allowing them legal access to therapeutic cannabis. The law requires the Department of Health and Human Services to partner with the cities and towns in which an alternative treatment center known as ATC is proposing to locate its operations in order to solicit input from the town's residents, as well as from potentially qualifying patients and designated caregivers. Merrimack is the proposed location for the dispensary operations of a company called Prime Alternative Treatment Centers of New Hampshire, Prime ATC. Prime ATC is the vendor selected by the department to operate in Geographic Area 2, which includes Merrimack and Hillsborough counties. Prime ATC's cultivation and manufacturing site has been proposed for Peterborough, which was the subject of a similar public input session in Peterborough last week. The decision to legalize cannabis for the therapeutic reasons has been determined by the New Hampshire legislature. The purpose of this meeting is not to debate the relative merits of therapeutic cannabis or cannabis in general. We are here tonight to learn more about the proposed dispensary in Merrimack from the Department of Health and Human Services and Prime ATC. We have already held two meetings, one with the Planning Board and one with the Town Council, relative to the zoning changes having to do with ATCs. Tonight's meeting is to allow Merrimack residents, potentially qualifying patients, and designated caregivers an opportunity to ask questions and offer comments. The forum will begin with a presentation by the Department of Health and Human Services, followed by a presentation by Prime ATC, then your questions and comments. We ask that residents of Merrimack be provided with the opportunity to comment first, followed by potentially qualifying patients and designated caregivers, and if there is time remaining, other interested parties. When you come up, you can stand up right here is probably the most comfortable, although if you'd like to sit down, you may do that as well. Please state your name and the town you come from. Merrimack is known for having a very respectful manner in which we express our concerns and our questions. And I would like to think that will continue this evening. Okay, let me introduce Jake Leon, Director of Communications for the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. Jake?
Thank you, Chair Harrington, for that introduction. And thank you to the members of the Town Council for hosting tonight's public forum. Finally, thanks to all of you for coming tonight. As Nancy said, my name is Jake Leon, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's public forum. I had some prepared remarks, but unfortunately the chair really kind of stole my thunder. She said everything I think I really needed to say. But I do have a few points to make, and then I will make some introductions before we begin the presentations. The legislature has directed the Department of Health and Human Services to implement the Therapeutic Cannabis Program. That includes establishing alternative treatment centers in 4 geographic areas across the state. In June, DHHS selected 3 alternative treatment centers in the 4 geographic areas to begin identifying specific locations for their operations. We are partnering with cities and towns where these operations have been proposed to solicit public input from residents, potentially qualifying patients, and designated caregivers. Tonight, we are glad you're here because your input is invaluable. I would like to take a moment to introduce my colleagues, and then we will begin with a presentation by the Department of Health and Human Services, followed by a presentation by Prime ATC, at which point we will then open up the floor to your questions and your comments. I'm joined actually all over, by colleagues with the Department of Health and Human Services. Allow me to introduce Mary Castelli, who is the Senior Division Director in the Office of Operations Support, John Martin, who is the Manager of the Bureau of Licensing and Certification, and Michael Holt, who is our Rules Coordinator. To my left, with Prime ATC, is Brett Sicklick, the Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Gilbert Fanchulo and Dr. Corey Birchman, who are the medical advisors to Prime, and John Beejan, the Director of Security with Prime. To their left is Rod Bascom, my colleague with DHHS. He is a supervisor in the Health Facilities Administration. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mary Castelli to begin a presentation from the State Department of Health and Human Services.
Good evening, and thank you. Good evening. Thank you for hosting us this evening. We very much appreciate it. And thank you very much for everyone who's come out tonight to listen and to participate and share your comments. The Therapeutic Cannabis Advisory, the Therapeutic Cannabis Program was created by the legislature, and we're working very closely with the legislature as we implement it. The legislature created a Therapeutic Advisory Council, which includes a number of members of the legislature and the public, medical boards, and law enforcement, and the department has been working very closely with them as we go forward. The department's responsibilities in this area are to, first of all, to select the ATCs, and we have selected 3 for 4 regions, and then to maintain a registry of qualifying patients and designated caregivers. To become a qualifying patient, you must have a very serious medical condition specified by our legislature, and it is stricter than other states. Then you must be certified by a treating physician or treating APRN with whom you have a relationship of at least 3 months. Then the designated caregiver is one who may be selected by a patient, also has to register with the department. These individuals go through a careful certification process, and we have a set of rules that regulates just how that process is carried out. They get identification cards that they must use if they go into the ATC. The ATC is off limits to anyone but authorized individuals such as a designated caregiver or a qualifying patient who's got their card and has been identified to the ATC as assigned to that ATC. Throughout the process, the department has worked very carefully to develop a series of rules also for the alternative treatment centers. They're quite regulated, and there are some fairly stringent regulations regarding security and a number of other programmatic requirements that they must adhere to carefully, and they will be overseen by the department. The department will be continuing to regulate them, visiting them, inspecting them, and working very closely with them to ensure the success of the program and that they're in full compliance with the requirements of law. The actual alternative treatment centers themselves are also required by law to be very low-key. They're not to have flashy lights. There should be no neon lights. A very quiet exterior, inconspicuous, not one that brings public attention to the site. There are very strict limitations on any advertising that's permitted. Basically, advertising is not permitted, just information that's provided to the qualifying patients. The growing cultivation site, which is not in Merrimack, and the dispensary site, which is proposed for Merrimack, does have very stringent security controls, and there is a requirement within our rule that the ATC work very closely with your own police chief, Chief Boyle, who I've met this evening, and who has had conversations with Prime ATC, the entity that has been selected for this area. So those are high points about the program. I'm not going to speak too much because I want to leave plenty of time for Prime ATC to speak and then to turn it over to you. But thank you again for your interest and attention tonight.
And if I could just follow up with a couple of other things very quickly. As Mary indicated, the only people who will be allowed in the alternative treatment centers are qualifying patients, designated caregivers, and the actual employees of the ATC. They'll all have identification cards. However, the alternative treatment center and the department will also have a database with all of the names. So when a person goes in, when they show the card, ATC will check the database to make sure that, in fact, they are a patient of that alternative treatment center. A patient and a caregiver can only choose one ATC, and so that'll be in the database. They won't be able to go from ATC to ATC trying to get more therapeutic cannabis than they're authorized to have. And that'll also prevent anyone attempting to get cannabis using a fraudulent card or a forged card, because we'll check the database. So if they have a card but they're not in the database, then they're not going to get therapeutic cannabis. Also, as Mary indicated, we do have a very comprehensive rule that governs all of the operations of the alternative treatment centers. That's a rule that's known as HEC 402. It's available on our website. If you go to the Department of Health and Human Services website, you'll see topics A to Z. You can click on C for cannabis. That'll get you to the Therapeutic Cannabis website, and you can access the rules. So you can see what the rules require in terms of security, in terms of inventory control, and so on. So I absolutely encourage anyone who's interested to take a look at those rules, because they really are very, very comprehensive.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mary. Now I'd like to turn our attention to Prime ATC, which will deliver a presentation on its proposed dispensary location.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. I really wanted to just kind of start off by introducing ourselves again. My name is Brett Sicklick. I'll be the Chief Operating Officer for Prime ATC. To my left is Gilbert Fanciullo. He is our medical advisor. He comes from Dartmouth Hitchcock, as well as Dr. Corey Birchman. And John Bagan is our security officer. He has an extensive history here with the state police, and is very familiar, obviously, with cannabis in general, as well as maybe other illegal products that might have been on the marketplace. But in any event, really, we're here to extend our willingness and our need to be a part of this community, and our interest in providing as much education as we can to ensure the public that this is not going to detriment the quality of life that this community has worked so hard to build and maintain. I know that's very, very important to everybody here, and we're here to assure you that this is not going to be an eyesore or a detriment to the community. We operate a dispensary in South Windsor, Connecticut, a town very similar to Merrimack, and we've been operating for close to a year now. There has not been a raise in crime. There has not been diverted product getting into the hands of children, or product showing up in local high schools or elementary schools or middle schools. It just is not happening. And the reason that we attribute our success and not having diverted product ending up in the wrong hands is by education. Every patient that walks through our doors in Connecticut, much like they will here in New Hampshire, will receive a one-on-one consultation with a representative of the facility dispensary agent. During that consultation, it allows us to review the program in general, help the patient or designated caregiver understand the rules and regulations that they must abide by in order to be consistently enrolled in the program, but also to really kind of bring them up to speed as far as what is cannabinoid therapy, what is medical cannabis, because I think it's a lot different than all of us are maybe think that it is. This is a natural medicine. This is a safer product than just about anything you might find in your house, including a pharmacy. That's the fact of the matter. And we've found that by educating people responsibly, especially parents who might have young children in the home who could access this product, we have to educate them. You need to keep it away. You need to keep it locked. You need to ensure that your children cannot access it. And by doing that, and by really stressing those points, we've found that parents are able to act responsibly. And by doing so, this has not become a threat to the community in Connecticut, nor will be in Merrimack. So again, we really appreciate you allowing us to come here and speak with you. And we just want to be a part of the community. We want to really do whatever we can to instill confidence and make everybody feel comfortable. And we know this is going to be a work in progress. Our doors are always open. We are always available to come to meetings like this and to be a part, again, of the community. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to kind of run through a quick program just to kind of show what a dispensary facility might look like. So. So, as was stated earlier, you shouldn't expect to see something that a building that's going to have flashy signs or neon signs or anything that's going to attract attention to it. Really, we're going off of understatement. We want to treat this like any other medical building, and that's what we've done in Connecticut, and that's what we'll do here in New Hampshire. So this is just an example of a cultivation center that's not really necessarily relevant here, but just thought we would show it in case anybody was interested. As you can see here, this is kind of the retail sales area in our dispensary in Connecticut. We designed it for patient comfort because we know that people that come into our facility are severely debilitated. I would say over 50% of the patients that access our dispensary on a daily basis are using some type of aid in terms of a walker, wheelchair, or something to that effect to get in our facility. So we wanted it to be a comfortable environment, which someone who's 21 years old, younger patient, to someone who's 90 years old would feel comfortable, and also family and friends would feel comfortable sending them there. That's how we designed the facility in Connecticut. We'll do the same thing here in Merrimack. As you can see from the outside of the building, again, there's no neon signs. There's nothing to announce to anybody driving by what the nature of the business is that's occurring inside of our facility. And again, the same thing will happen in Merrimack. You can see on the top right, that's our kind of secure entrance. So, the general public, registered patients, caregivers cannot just open the door and come in. They must, depress the button on the right there on the call box to announce themselves. There's a security camera that's built into that so we can see the individual that's attempting to come into the building. They have to present their registry identification card before they come in, just so we can ensure that it's not someone who might pose a threat to the facility coming into the building. On the bottom left there, you'll see a security window. Every person that walks into our doors, we have to double check that they are in fact a registered patient or designated caregiver. We'll review their credentials, which is usually 2 forms of ID. We'll reference that with the current list of qualifying patients that are registered to our facility before we let them in. And the picture on the bottom right there is just kind of a general waiting area. So this is, again, the secure patient waiting area. This is where the dispensing of product is going to occur. It will look roughly the same in Merrimack as well. Again, we're going for a facility that's clean, that's professional, and that's a comfortable environment for patients who are suffering from a myriad of conditions. In Connecticut, the regulations are a little bit different than here in Merrimack. They're actually, it's extremely stringent. Not that the program isn't here, but pharmacists are responsible for dispensing the medication in Connecticut. So it's, again, different than New Hampshire. But you can see that the products don't contain any bright, flashy labels. There's no cartoons or characters. Everything is in a opaque bottle. You cannot see through it. It's childproof. And that's really, again, to ensure that the people who we don't want getting a hand of this product, getting a handle on it, are not going to, and that it's not attractive to children or anybody underage. As you can see here, this is where we store the medication during business hours as well as overnight. We have vaults that are all alarmed, and the purpose of that is if someone is to happen to break into the facility, that there's multiple boundaries that occur before they're able to get access to the product, in hopes that it gives us enough time, obviously, for law enforcement to intervene and prevent the diversion or theft of any product. So that just kind of gives everybody an idea of what a dispensary facility might look like.
Thank you, Brett. At this point, we will open the floor to questions. Just a few reminders to follow up on what Chair Harrington said. We are here tonight to discuss a dispensary location, ATC dispensary location here in Merrimack. We're not here to discuss the legislation. The legislature already approved this bill. We are interested in hearing certainly from Merrimack residents, as well as potentially qualifying patients and designated caregivers. I'd like to open the floor to Merrimack residents first, followed by potentially qualifying patients, designated caregivers, at which point we can open the floor up to general questions from interested individuals. If you have questions, I encourage you to ask you to come up to the microphone, and we will take your questions there. Please state your name and your town of residence.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, my name is Bill Boyd. I live in Merrimack. I'm one of the town councils here, and I want to thank all of you here for providing this hearing to the community of Merrimack. I had the opportunity to look through the registry rules, and I had a couple of questions, and I'm new to reading these sort of things, so I know Health and Human Services might talk in a language that I'm not normally accustomed to, so I hope you'll grant me some latitude. Title 21 of the Federal Code, Section 1300 specifically recognizes marijuana as a said Schedule I substance, meaning it has no medicinal value to it. And I was wondering, has the state looked at that particular fact as it relates to their particular rules?
The product is called Therapeutic because it is not considered a legal medicine. It's illegal federally, yet the experience across the country, and we're the 23rd state, has shown that there has been a therapeutic benefit, particularly for certain conditions, and the legislature engaged in a policy discussion about that and determined that they would make this possible therapeutic alternative available to patients who then have to work with their physicians to be certified as having these conditions. Some states are ahead of us, and they found that there may be some conditions that benefit from it. Certain pain relief, where morphine can be very overwhelming. Cannabis can help to relieve the pain without totally affecting the individual. So I would say that that the legislature certainly considered those ideas very much and looked at other states and determined which limited conditions they would approve the use of this therapeutic alternative for.
I asked the question because in section HEC 401.06, you specifically provide mid-level you provide physicians to be able to dispense and nurse practitioners, but absent in that conversation is physician assistants, which is also a mid-level practitioner. I'm just going to take the PAs out of the conversation because I want to dovetail off of your response. Nurse practitioners are only allowed to dispense Schedule II to Schedule V drugs in the state of New Hampshire. You have nurse practitioners, you have physician assistants, and you have naturopathic doctors that they consider mid-level that dispense. But in accordance to the federal reg, and the state's working off of those particular practices in their ability to dispense, I interpret that as an exclusion for them to be able to dispense marijuana because the federal government has recognized it as a Schedule 1, as a Schedule 1 drug. So I'm looking to see if the state is going to add clarity that would allow nurse practitioners and physicians in the state to, from a paper perspective, be able to legally prescribe and dispense the therapeutic cannabis.
So because cannabis is illegal federally, the physician or APRN does not dispense or prescribe. What they do is they certify. They certify the patient as with whom they have a relationship of at least 3 months as having one of the conditions plus one of the designated symptoms. So in New Hampshire, it's limited condition plus a symptom, and the way that our state, as other states have addressed that issue of federal prohibition, is they are not prescribing, they are certifying the patient.
So, third question, why were physician assistants excluded from the actual set of rules?
Well, I suppose New Hampshire just started with a little bit more limited approach and started with the physician and the APRN.
Physician assistants is one of the growing practices right now in the state of New Hampshire.
Mike, push your...
Thank you. I could offer a comment on that. Our rules follow the law, which allow physicians and APRNs to certify a condition. There was a bill introduced this past session that would have allowed physician assistants to participate in this program as well. It did not make it out of the House Health and Human Services and Education Committee, and it was voted to ITL it.
It was ITL?
Yes, it
Okay.
was.
Okay. The other question that I have is more from a processing standpoint. In HCC 4109, you talk about severe debilitating illnesses and terminal medical conditions that are not listed in the set of rules that are in the definitions that are aligned in HEC 401.02. Does the Department of Health and Human Services have a process in place by which they're able to define whether or not a condition is quote-unquote medically necessary for the department to be able to issue the medical ID card to either the provider or their proxy? So in other words, do you have a board-certified physician or somebody of a clinical nature, whether they be an internist, family practice, that is going to sit down and is actually going to read the criteria by which the doctor is making the application to Health and Human Services, and they are going to certify whether or not that the patient is, quote-unquote, has a medical necessity, deeming them qualified to receive the medical ID card and obviously be able to come to Prime ATC to, with their script, to be able to receive the cannabis?
Thank you. The way the department has responded to that situation is we've carefully followed first the statute that says what are qualifying conditions and what are the symptoms that would be necessary to also have. You have to have the condition plus a symptom in order to qualify. Then we have created a series of rules which you've been noting. In addition to that, we have created a form that has to be filled out by the certifying physician who's certifying under pains and penalties of perjury that the patient has the particular condition, and they indicate which one, and the particular symptom or symptoms and which one, and they will be providing, the patient will also be providing certain required information that identifies them as a citizen of New Hampshire, and that information will come into us, and we will review it, make sure that it's appropriate and a valid documentation, and then we will be issuing the card. So the doctor makes the certification.
So there's no oversight at Health and Human Services. The only oversight regarding the denial would be the administrative denial, where the individual may have a criminal record, the individual applied for it previously, like you outlined the rules. So basically, the administrative process is specifically from a background and application point of view, and not necessarily a clinical.
That's right. The department does not step into the clinician's shoes. There is a relationship between the patient and their treating physician, and that's the process which is created to provide information that is then provided to our department, and we're reviewing it for its accuracy, its completeness. If we saw something irregular in the paperwork or in the processing that caused us to have a concern, we would follow up on that, but we're not going to be doing examinations of patients. That will be the role of the physician or APRN.
Okay, so it's not the goal of Health and Human Services to question what the doctor is asking you to do.
No, they must certify the person has cancer
Correct.
or lupus, and they're.
Well, I'm not talking about
right.
There's language in there that says that anything that's not clearly defined or one or more injuries that significantly interferes with daily activities is documented by the patient's provider, which is kind of a nebulous, all-encompassing kind of language.
That's a little broad, that particular language, but our form then requires the physician to then fill that out and specify what exactly those additional circumstances are.
And my last question, and thank you very much for indulging me. In Section 402.25 under confidentiality, you provide HIPAA language for the Alternative Treatment Center, but in Section 401.15, there is no HIPAA language as it relates to the treatment of documentation at the Department of Health and Human Services. And I was wondering if that language could be consistent across the board with the rules so that everybody's HIPAA compliant.
So the department is required to comply with the law, and there's language in the statute that indicates that these treatment information is to be treated as HIPAA information with the security surrounding that. And of course, our department is charged with complying with the law. When we pass our rules, the rules are directed toward those that we regulate, so we don't generally put language in about what we will do. So the rule is aimed outward at the patients and physicians and the ATCs, but we ourselves, of course, will be complying with the law and must do so.
You don't think there should be HIPAA language in there that you have written in for
It's
the
in
ATCs
it's in the
already?
statute. We have, as you can imagine, Health and Human Services, so many different medical programs. You just can only imagine all the variety of different types of programs, and those programs do operate HIPAA compliant.
Okay, I appreciate your time. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much
very
for answering my
much.
questions.
Thank you, Councilman.
Hi, folks. I don't mean to speak out of turn. I did not want to interrupt him too soon. But I would like to bring it back to the focus on Merrimack.
Your name?
My name is Keith Saunders. I am a part-time resident of New Hampshire, part-time resident of Massachusetts, longtime activist in the marijuana policy reform movement. And I would just like to bring it back to Merrimack. And we know very much that cannabis is a safe and effective medicine. And then when somebody does die from a lethal overdose, please talk with me, because it'll be the first time. We're talking about extremely safe medicine that is understandably coming from a position of prohibition with great excessive regulation upon it. But suffice to say, Mr. Siklick, how many jobs will be coming to Merrimack because of this dispensary?
Sure. I think, probably at the height of our business, we should employ about 10 individuals at the dispensary facility.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good evening. Donnie Berardinez, 2 Acacia Street, Merrimack, resident for 20 years. Question is more towards Prime. Basically, who's minding the store? You don't have a license yet to dispense
We do have a license to dispense.
in New Hampshire?
Correct.
Okay. Type of corporation, LLC, what type of business is Prime ATC?
Sure. It's a nonprofit business. So there is an LLC, but it is a nonprofit business.
If I could simply add to that also, New Hampshire's requirements regarding the business structure is that it be a charitable nonprofit, and they are registered with the New Hampshire Charitable Bureau an addition to being a nonprofit.
Thank you. DHHS must have spent a couple months, years in selecting the final 3 companies that are supporting New Hampshire. Question is, how long has Prime been in business?
Sure. So we've been operating the facility in Connecticut for just about a year now.
Any other state?
I've worked in other states. I've worked in Colorado. I'm from Connecticut originally, but worked in the industry for 6 years in Colorado before I moved back to work with Prime Wellness in Connecticut for the past year.
Okay, so correct me. So Prime has been in business in Connecticut for a year, other locations for whenever, but how long has it been in business in New Hampshire? That's what we're talking about, Merrimack.
Yeah, we have not been in business at all. We just got the license just a few months back.
Okay. Members that are representing Prime, board members?
Yeah, so 2 are right to my left here.
Have any board members had experiences in opening up dispensaries in other states?
Not these 2 individuals here, but others have. Yes.
Does the name John Glowick mean anything?
Of course, absolutely.
Is he involved in the Prime ATC?
Yes,
That's
he
going to
is.
be in Merrimack.
Yes.
Is it true that he tried to open up 2, or I apologize, that he applied for 2 licenses under the JCS Holdings Company in Massachusetts and was denied twice?
No, actually. So JCS Holdings was another individual that had applied for a license. He had asked our organization in his second stage of going for a license to come on board and assist with that process. Unfortunately, he was disqualified because of issues that happened before we were ever involved with that company.
So then was another company, Prime ATC, filed in Massachusetts on
Yes, we did.
April 29th, already has 2 other applications into the state to be a dispensary?
Yes, so we did apply for the first round in Massachusetts, and we've done so again this year as well. So we would like to open dispensaries in Massachusetts
Are
as well.
there any connections between this Prime ATC serving Merrimack
Yeah.
and Haven Center?
No, they're not. Absolutely not.
It just comes across via the internet, state filings and the like, and filings that were made in John Glowick's handwriting that can be copied off the internet, that it seems to be where if it couldn't be done in Massachusetts this way, because you have to have a dispensary before you can have a production station, growing station, I don't know how the proper name, the one that was in Peterborough.
Sure.
But it just does not give me the warm and fuzzies with board members that are involved in other companies, either before or after Prime ATC that serves Merrimack, that faulted in their applications for whatever reason. So is John Glowick part of Prime ATC that serves Merrimack?
Absolutely, and he was also a part of Prime Wellness, which was successful in obtaining a license in the state of Connecticut.
Who's the head of Prime ATC in New Hampshire? Who signed the LLC?
John Glowick did.
How did he get that to be signed? I apologize. How was it made of? How was the name Prime ATC made available to John to LLC?
It's a brand new LLC. There was nobody with a pre-existing business with that name. So
So it was never reserved by anyone?
not that I am aware of, no.
You might want to check to make sure that the name was not reserved by. And this is also where it might bring a little bit of politics into it. 12/24/14, Donald C. Crandallmeyer, director of Shaheen and Gordon, attorneys in Concord,
Sure.
filed for the reserve of the name, Prime ATC.
He's our legal representative.
So he filed and got the name reserved.
Correct.
On January 8th, John Glowick put in the application for the LLC. On January 15th, Don transferred, or Shaheen transferred the name to John. Okay?
Sure.
So yes, the name was reserved. Yes, it was transferred to John. My question is, who picked John to run Prime in terms of being the head back in January, where it was already proven in 2014 he tried to apply twice and didn't get approved?
I was a part of that organization as well. I think that anybody here who's familiar with the process in Massachusetts can understand that there was serious issues as to why. I mean, they just opened up a dispensary for the first time within the past couple months after having a program on a similar timeline as Connecticut. If you look in the many of the news outlets, Boston Globe specifically, of all the issues that were surrounding that whole process, I think there's no question that there was serious red flags. So because we were not awarded a license in the state of Massachusetts, I don't think has any...
Posted November 8th by the Cape Cod Times. JCS Holdings, John Glowick, call him whatever you want.
Sure.
Was denied their application for a medical marijuana dispensary because the group lacked the required cash and misled the state regarding its control of the target site.
Again, that was something that occurred before we were ever involved with that company, and that's
But yet
that's the
he
reality.
was involved with that to an extent.
Sure.
So he's involved with this to an extent.
He's directly involved with this.
Hence, I'm not getting the warm and fuzzies.
Okay.
Thank you.
Understood.
Are any other questions from Merrimack residents? And potentially qualifying patients, designated caregivers? Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Please come to the microphone.
As you can see from the sign, my name is Roger Tilton. I don't live in Merrimack, but I do live in the 11th New Hampshire State Senate District, which includes Milford, Wilton, and Amherst. I do have one question, but I'll save it till the end. What I want to do is I want to thank Nancy for chairing this meeting, and I want to thank Mary and Jake for the very good work that you've done. It's got to be a difficult chore to take legislation and try to bring it to reality. And to Brett and your team, I want to apologize, that you have to go through this slow, monotonous process to get to where you want to be. But what I really want to do tonight is address you people, the voters and the residents of Merrimack and the community. I'm only going to take about a minute and a half, but I want to tell you my personal story. I moved out here about 12 years ago from Seattle, where I lived for 26 years. I still work in Seattle. I commute back and forth. So for the last 38 years, I've spent a lot of time in the state of Washington. I go to Seattle about once a month, maybe 13 or 14 or 15 times a year. And I've seen what's happened since the state of Washington took that step to stop arresting people for marijuana and then to change the law to allow medical marijuana. And then in 2012, the voters voted to allow anybody 21 or over to buy marijuana like they buy alcohol. That was 2 years ago. And in those 2 years, I've seen what's happened. It's a lot like same-sex marriage. Nothing changed. Except now we don't have a lot of pot busts in Washington. We don't have a lot of criminals. We don't have a lot of district attorneys charging people for having a joint. We're not ruining people's lives in Washington and Colorado because some 18 or 19-year-old got caught. What I'm here to tell you is the world is not going to change if there's a dispensary in Merrimack. In fact, we are so far behind the people of the United States. The pursuit of happiness is different in every region of the country. But from what we've seen in Colorado and Washington, what the voters in Oregon and Alaska and the District of Columbia have done, and now there's 11 more states poised to legalize marijuana for adults 21 and over, I feel bad for the bureaucrats. I feel bad for the company. We are so far behind. You look at the revenue that's being generated by legal, regulated, taxed marijuana, and what I can tell you is that nothing has changed, except there's fewer people in jail, fewer drug busts, fewer court costs. Look at California. California legalized medical marijuana in 1996. That's almost 20 years ago. There are something like 1,100 or 1,200 marijuana dispensaries just in the Los Angeles region, and we're talking about one in Merrimack, 4 in the state of Washington. You know what I read today? Anybody go to Costco in Nashua? Costco is from Seattle, and they announced over the weekend that they're going to start selling cannabis in bulk. But that's how Costco rolls. The other thing that I'm disappointed about with what's going on over here is that you can only go to the dispensary if you have 4 life-ending or debilitating diseases. We need legal cannabis for our vets who suffer from PTSD. Cannabis is one of the best medicines for PTSD. Absolutely. I've seen it firsthand. I've lived with this for the last 40 years, and I'm here to tell you there's nothing to be afraid of. Thank you very much.
Well, I would simply observe that it is a legislative policy decision as to how cannabis is to be handled in the state, and it is DHHS's role to carry out the implementation and to follow the law. So we are carefully following the guidance and direction of the law. And there are approximately 12 serious medical conditions that the legislature has identified as qualifying conditions.
And just to add to that, I think what the legislature has done here, and I think very wisely, is started this program small. It's a brand new program for New Hampshire. We don't know, exactly what to expect. It's easier to expand a program as appropriate than to contract one. So I think starting with the parameters that it has, with the idea that the legislature can expand it if there's a need for that, if it's appropriate, I think was a wise way to go.
And we do have the Therapeutic Advisory Council that is overseeing this program as it goes forward, so they can see what do they think as we're going forward. Do they think we need to do something a little differently? Do they think we need to take an extra step? So we're working very closely with this emerging program and with the legislature.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Elaine Batchelder. I live on Bigwood Drive. I've lived in Merrimack for 50 years. And I wish you get an elevator in this building. Thanks. I'm not opposed to what you want to do. I am opposed to it being in Merrimack. I think a better place would be Nashua, Manchester, or Concord. We have no public transportation. You say that 50% of your people have mobility issues. They're not going to be driving. So make it accessible to people to get to where you're going to be. And don't stick it in a town that doesn't have a downtown. We have storefronts and strip malls. Not the place, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So when we had this program to implement, the legislature asked that we try to consider geographic diversity so that the convenience of patients across the state could be assured. And you can't assure the convenience of any one person. There's only 4 regions for the entire, 4 areas for the entire state. So no particular location is going to be perfect. However, I will say that Prime ATC worked very carefully in reviewing Merrimack before it made its selection, and perhaps Brett could speak to that.
Yeah, really I think we chose Merrimack strictly for patient access because we realized the area that we were going to be serving, as large as it is, we felt as though this was the most centralized area for patients to access. And I totally understand where you're coming from as far as public transportation. But fortunately we have designated caregivers that can either acquire the medicine for a patient so they don't have to travel to the facility, or they can transport or help transport that individual. So there are ways in which a patient who is debilitated can reach the facility. But again, we felt as though this location was the most centralized to the region that we are going to be serving.
Hello, my name's Susie Cant, and I live in District 11. I live in the town of Wilton. Over the past 5 years, I've become more involved in drug policy reform and becoming aware of the different medical benefits of cannabis. And listening to the different presentations, there was a lot of talk about keeping it away from children. I'm a mom. I've got 2 kids. But I also have friends who have kids who are living in Colorado, living in Washington and Oregon, and their kids benefit from CBD oil. Sure. CBD oil is a form of extracted cannabis that has low THC, which is the part that gets you high, and CBD is the components that are really amazing for kids with epilepsy and seizures and that sort of thing. And so I wondered if you had anything to offer about that aspect of it. Will you be offering CBD-only products in your dispensary?
Absolutely. Actually,
Okay.
Roughly 75% of the products that we'll make available are going to be non-psychoactive, and whether that's because they have CBD-dominant products or they're topical products. Yes, absolutely. That is our intention.
And whatnot.
Yeah, and when I said not having the products available to children, that was children who obviously wouldn't qualify for the program.
Yeah, it's funny how the law makes it okay for some kids but not for others.
A,
But,
a minor,
I appreciate your time.
A minor can become a qualifying patient. However, there's the extra requirement that 2 physicians certify the child, and the parent or guardian must be the designated caregiver.
Yeah,
So
that
we
makes
have to
sense.
be a treating physician and a pediatrician certifies that the child has the care condition, and it would be a conversation between those physicians and the parent.
Good. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Withrow. I'm a nurse practitioner and the owner of Palliativity Medical Group in Bedford. I'm a resident of Manchester. I am a palliative care nurse practitioner, which means all of my patients have serious and life-threatening illnesses. Many of them could benefit from therapeutic use of cannabis. Many of them are now, but they just don't have the legal protection yet. I want to agree, here she is. I think you do need an elevator. I have an air cast. It was difficult getting up the stairs. And the gentleman, where is he, that asked a question about nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, why they can't prescribe. It's my understanding that physician assistants are not able to prescribe because, I'm sorry, I'm shaking, that with their, it's within their state scope of practice that they require supervision from a physician. So that's the answer for that. Otherwise, nurse practitioners and physician assistants practice pretty much the same, except in the state of New Hampshire. Nurse practitioners are able to practice autonomously, which I do. I'm very, very happy to hear that this is coming. It's been a long time coming, and with the other one, Mr. Tilton, here he is. I agree with you. It's a long time coming. It does need to be regulated. For those of you who are not in the medical, I can tell you that in my research of this, it is much more difficult for me to, I can't say order or prescribe because we're not prescribing it, we're recommending it. And then we certify that they have one of the medical conditions. But it is much more difficult for one of my patients right now, who is the targeted patient population for therapeutic cannabis in New Hampshire. It's much more difficult for them to get that than it is for me to just simply write a prescription out for oxycodone, morphine, Dilaudid, Xanax, Ativan, anything, any other of the things that are controlled. I did have one question from you, and it's coming more from the medical community. For prescribers like myself, or providers like myself, what are you have alternative treatment center agents who the qualified patients will be going to. So what are the qualifications for them? There's a lot of concern for prescribers like myself who know about medication, albeit I am not a marijuana expert. I'm learning, but certainly not an expert. But what are the qualifications? Because as I understand it, we recommend they get their card, they go through the process of getting a card, then they come to see an agent at the treatment center, and that person, again, assesses their what they're certified for and their symptoms, and they decide which of the many, many different types of marijuana is best for them and how much they get. So what kind of training do your agents have, and what kind of background?
Yeah, I would let Brett speak to the training of the people that are going to work in our clinics, but so myself, for example, I'm anesthesiologist, pain medicine, hospice and palliative medicine specialist, been practicing in the state for almost 20 years. I founded the palliative medicine service at Dartmouth. I run the pain clinic. I want to add right up front that what I say reflect my views and not the views of Dartmouth Hitchcock. But Dartmouth Hitchcock is aware that I'm here, and I've had no bad response from Dartmouth whatsoever about it, even though these are my views, not Dartmouth's views. We had a conference in November in Hanover, which was called the International Symposium on Cannabis. And the purpose of that symposium was really to train providers. Because one of the things we learned in the state of Vermont, I was on the medical marijuana committee in the state of Vermont before they authorized cannabis. One of the things we've learned from some of the dispensary owners in the state of Vermont is that there's a level of discomfort with the fact that you and I are pretty ignorant about how to recommend cannabis. And so one of the things that we want to do is really educate the providers in our state who are going to be recommending these drugs. So they're going to know the difference between CBD and THC, and they're going to know that they can take a 2-to-1 ratio CBD to THC lozenge. They're not going to get high from it, and it's going to help with their pain. And they're going to know what the evidence is to support the use of these drugs and what the potential side effects are. So I think it's going to be a process of educating my colleagues in the state, my nurse practitioner and physician colleagues in the state, and also to educate the people that are going to be working in our dispensaries who are going to meet with every patient that gets certified and talk to them about the types of drugs that they're going to be receiving or that they have access to. So I think it's going to be a process, and so I don't know what the specific educational background is of the folks, Brett, that with regard to that work in the dispensaries.
Sure. Despite what many people believe, there are significant clinical studies which do exist that have been conducted here in the United States as well as in other countries around the world relative to using cannabis for a multitude of maladies as well as symptoms. So it's really training from that perspective. There's also a lot of significant data that we've collected from our experience in Connecticut that will be incorporated into the training module for the facility, just because many of the products that are available there will also be available here in New Hampshire. So, it's understanding patient response to specific dosages. And I know, as kind of Gil mentioned, that's really, I would say, the biggest physician fear is, how do I recommend a dose? I know I'm qualifying a patient for the program, but once they get to the facility where they're going to be acquiring the medication, whose responsibility is it then to ensure that that patient receives the right product? So, our purpose is to educate the patient, to educate the designated caregiver, to educate the medical community, what an appropriate dosage is per an individual. And, there's no question that it's a work in progress, and that's obviously what we're going to be training our staff to understand. But it's not a race to the top as far as finding the highest dosage. It's working closely with that patient to understand what's appropriate for them, what's providing the relief, what's not providing the negative maybe side effects that might come from cannabis, to ensure that everybody's getting the most benefit from it. So there's absolutely significant training that will occur, and of a very high level as well.
Can I add one point? Is this on?
Yes.
And I, as well, am a faculty member of Dartmouth, and again, I speak as a private practitioner and not as a representative of that medical center. Gil was being a little modest, but between he and I, we probably have almost 75 years of collective experience in dealing with pain management. I'm also an anesthesiologist, and we're very fortunate because within our group, I would say we are among the top authorities, certainly in the state, on the use of cannabis medically, and we have a very strong focus towards education. The symposium we put on last year was very well attended by physicians and allied medical practitioners in this state, and we are dedicated and very significantly invested in educating our peers, because I think that's the best way to convince the public that this is really medicine. We are really talking about medicine. The endocannabinoid system, which is what it's called, is every bit as sophisticated as the narcotic system that the body has. And our job is to get that message out. We're not talking about pot here. These are not stoners that we're going to be taking care of. This is real medicine, and as Brett alluded to, most of it is not of the component that gets people stoned. There are, in any given strain of cannabis, there may be 50 different molecules that are pharmaceuticals that have very good activity, and it is to the credit of the state health administrators that they're finally bringing this state into what I would consider the 21st century.
Hi, my name's Tom Koenig. I happen to be a member of the town council. I'm here as a member of Merrimack, and I've been sitting here listening and somewhat amazed at the acronyms and the words and stuff that come out, and you finally sort of brought out the word pot and stoners and things like that. And I think a lot of people in the public, and I will freely admit that I'm not well-versed in cannabis, use of it therapeutically or anything like that, but using the term ITL, throwing it out, most of the public in a public forum probably has little clue what that is. The people that you were talking to probably knew exactly what it was. And it has nothing to do with cannabis. I understand that's an expedient to legislate, and it talks about the legislature not passing that particular law. But if you can be very careful in a public forum to help us to understand all the things you're talking about, so CPD and EAQ and whatever other numbers and letters you guys are throwing out, doesn't really jive or mean anything to me. And if you could help us to understand the form and factor of what you're distributing. Is it cannabis that you roll up in a paper and smoke in a joint like everybody thinks when they hear about marijuana dispensaries? Or is it pills? Is it, processed down to the point where, it becomes something that looks like, an Advil or something like that?
Gil, you want to take that?
I understand that. So if you can just help us to understand, and I've heard 75% and other numbers, but a lot of the public just isn't very clear on what it is that you're actually providing and how it's consumed and used.
Gotcha, thanks.
Thank
you. So the forms of administration are really all of the things that you alluded to. There are salves or creams. There are tinctures, which is basically a concentrated version of cannabinoids that you can put on your tongue and will be absorbed with a drop or two on your tongue.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to translate. So cannabinoids is a medical term for molecules that act in the body that are produced by a marijuana plant. And so cannabinoids is like saying anti-inflammatory drugs. Okay, if you went into a drugstore and you said, I want anti-inflammatory drugs, you could go down a shelf and there are 50 different kinds. There's Motrin and there's Advil and Naproxen, etc. Well, cannabinoids, which is the term Gil used, which is a scientific term, that means, cannabis oids. And it was a term made up by a pharmacologist who studied marijuana plants and found out that there were 50 to 100 different compounds in a marijuana plant that has actions on the body. So that's what the family of cannabinoids mean. And we use this in terms on a daily basis. Obviously, for people outside the medical realm, it's got to be very confusing. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. And so there will be all these different forms of the drug. And so the most common the most common cannabinoid is THC. And THC is the psychoactive version, the psychoactive cannabinoid in marijuana. And so you'll see a lot of places that, if you go to California, and I have never been to a dispensary in California, so I'm speaking from what I've read in Time Magazine, but you can buy cannabis that has 18% THC, which is a very high percentage of THC. When I was in high school and people smoked marijuana, the percentage of THC might have been 2%. So this is very potent marijuana when you get these high THC concentrations. What we've realized, though, is that it's probably a combination of THC plus other cannabinoids that actually provide the therapeutic value to the drug. And so there's the second most common cannabinoid is a drug called CBD, cannabidiol. And as the CBD concentration goes up, the THC concentration goes down. And it's pretty easy for Brett, and I say it's easy for Brett, who's a very sophisticated horticulturist and chemist, to produce a strain that is high in CBD and low in THC. So that we'll have a mixture of drugs that are going to help our patients get pain relief, but are not going to get them high.
And can I interrupt for 1 second?
Anytime.
We're going back and forth. This is what we do every day. There are plants that have very little THC. For example, hemp, which was an agricultural crop in America for almost a century, that had no THC in it, but it's a member of the marijuana family. Well, cultivators are pretty sophisticated now, and they can grow marijuana that has virtually no THC, but has other components like CBD, cannabidiol, which happens to be a very effective anti-seizure medicine that's used in Europe extensively. It's an actual pill you can go to a drugstore and buy. We don't have that in this country. But there are a whole host of sort of alphabet soup cannabinoids that have activities that we can use to help patients.
I just wanted to add to this. We took a tour of the dispensary and a cultivation site in Connecticut, the Health and Human Services did. And one of the things that was interesting to observe was the increased use of the patches that you put on your body, which will administer the medication into the body, and that was an increasingly frequent use as opposed to smoking, which was, something that might be viewed as something that the stoners, as you expressed it, did at some point. But it's a different method of administration, and it is more therapeutically based. And if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that most of the products that we'll make available here in New Hampshire will look like any other traditional pharmaceutical product. Yes, there will be cannabis flowers, which someone could vaporize or smoke if they chose to, but really the other form factors will be capsules, there'll be transdermal patches, there'll be salves, there'll be things that individuals are familiar with that won't be really cumbersome for them to start to incorporate. It'll be just like any other medication they might take. And as I kind of mentioned, when I first started speaking earlier, that our role is to educate the community. That's what we want to do here. So we would love to hold public forums similar to this to bring people up to speed as far as terms like cannabinoids, THC, CBD, some of these this vernacular that we're using, so that people feel comfortable, and helps to kind of break down the barriers that I think are preventing people from maybe feeling more comfortable with this as a medicine. So that's something that we are, more than happy to do, that we want to do, and we would love to come here and provide that to Merrimack or any other community as we kind of lead up to dispensing product over the course of the next 6 months or so.
I'm probably the only one on the panel who hasn't said anything, so I just wanted to say a few words, and I can't really spell out all the words that the doctors were using, I'm here from a different perspective, and I have 25 years of law enforcement experience from New Hampshire. I'm born, raised in New Hampshire. I'm a New Hampshire resident. And I completed 25 years in law enforcement and retired last October from state police. And I was a troop commander and have a heavy background in regulatory compliance. And when I retired, this was not my retirement job that I thought of. And a lot of my friends still in law enforcement look at me and say, "What are you doing?" And I really haven't been excited about a job opportunity as much as this. And the reason is why. It's very, very clear to me. I got into law enforcement because I wanted to help people. I really did. And so it was a time for me to change. I'm still young. I won't say my age, but I'm still fairly young, and I want to do something in a second career. And when this was presented to me, I think I reached the end of the internet researching this, and I came back again. And that wasn't it. And I asked a lot of people who I know have been affected by these types of medical conditions, and the overwhelming theme is basically compassion for our fellow human beings who are suffering right now. Some of you may be in the audience who have a condition that you're not seeking any type of relief from under traditional methods. Or the traditional methods, and I don't mean to kind of speak from a medical perspective because I'm the worst person you want to ask for medical advice, but the medical risk associated with the common prescriptions and the common available treatments were way out of whack with what the risks were and the benefits were. And you read a lot of your common prescriptions and your risk of stroke, heart attack, cancer, or this or that, and you're like, why am I taking this to get rid of my headache? So having that other alternative, I know being in law enforcement that we have an epidemic in the state of opiate abuse and translating probably directly to heroin in the state. This I see as an alternative, a compassionate alternative for people who suffer from these ailments, from these conditions, to get relief with much less risk than what is associated with the traditional methods. I truly believe, what do I bring to the table for this program? I know very little about growing marijuana. I know very little about any of that medical advice, but what I can do and bring to this operation is ensure that from a security standpoint, which this is a high security type of field, is that we do everything we're required to do from a security standpoint. And I don't think there's anybody in here, and I know we didn't talk about diversion all that much, that's probably more concerned with diversion as am I. I have a teenager. I think it's important that we address diversion, not only from external sources, but from internal sources, from employees. Proper hiring practices, proper oversight. There's more security involved in this program than I would bet you would probably have seen any other industry in this state. In fact, if you were to look at from a security perspective, you may look at why is the security here and the risk is here, right? And I think it's because it's fairly new and there's a fear of going into this field. But it's important to me. My only regret that I have, it truly is, my only regret that I have is that we haven't done this a year sooner for the people who are suffering. And I want to make sure that from a security perspective, that we are going to get a secure environment for our patients. That you don't have to walk into the building itself. It's not going to have concertina wire around it. You're not going to have hungry dogs running up and down with German Shepherd protection dogs. You're not going to have an armed guard with a rifle sitting out front of the building. That's not going to happen. We have a security design that's well thought out. That was, and again, I won't get into our security protocols and procedures and what we're going to have, but the rules state what we have to have as a minimum, and we will by far exceed what the rules say. But we're able to provide a security that's there, that's layered with redundancy, but isn't demonstrative and in your face. That your building as you drive by will look like any other building. But from an insider's view, the layers of security that you get through are going to be hidden, but they're going to be present. And that is extremely important that you realize that we are not putting Fort Knox on Route 3 in Merrimack. from a perspective, it may be as safe as Fort Knox, but it certainly won't look like that from the outside. And we will have security staff there. Our security will be beyond reproach, redundancy built in, and again, like you said, through the regulatory process, there's a lot of things listed that you'll see, and if it's listed in the regulatory process, I can guarantee you we will have it. But I won't say everything, like I said, but it's very important to me that we approach this and it succeeds for everybody that's out there, and for our patients, and for the community, that we be good members and help, whether it be through our law enforcement partners in town, meeting with your police department, your police chief, who you are very lucky to have. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in their town, but the town of Merrimack has one of the highest reputations for the police department in the state. And working with them is going to be a privilege for me. And being part of that is very important. And working with them, having the input into our facility, open door. If you want to see what we're doing from A to Z, I am going to show you, and having that transparency. So if there are concerns out there, I would hope that our relationship with your police department is transparent enough that it's simple as picking up the phone, calling me, if there are any concerns whatsoever. So my goal is that you will never have concerns with us, that a year or two from now, you will go by there and say, wow, they were a good addition to our community. So I'm just saying that just because I thought there'd be a lot of security type questions, but if there are questions, I'd be willing to answer as much as I can from that perspective. But if nothing else, that's kind of my security perspective. Anyways, in a nutshell.
May I have it?
Please.
Thank you. So what I would like to say is, first of all, I think the state of New Hampshire is fantastic in allowing us to open these offices in Merrimack. And I think the people in Merrimack are fantastic. I've heard the state being criticized because it should have been a year ago, it should have been 2 years ago. There's still not medical cannabis in the state of New York, which is one of the states that people think is so forward thinking. And so I think that the people in this state have been very thoughtful about creating the rules. HHS has been terrific with us, and the town of Merrimack has been terrific with us. And I think that the people in this town are courageous to allow us to have this dispensary in this town, and they're also extremely caring. And I will tell you, the types of patients that we have experience in the state of Vermont now. So adjoining states can certify patients for medical cannabis in the state of Vermont. And the patients that I treat and have responded so positively to cannabis, I talk to my 75-year-old patients about cannabis, and I almost have to smirk a little bit because it's so odd for me it makes me feel so odd to have to do it. But the fact of the matter is, it's so useful for them. I've had so many patients come off of opioids. If anybody wonders about the scientific data supporting the use of cannabis, there is no question that the scientific data for chronic pain supports the use of cannabis, more so than Zohydro or oxycodone or any of the opioids. And I'm very familiar with all those studies, more so than any of those drugs. And the drug is so much safer. It gives me an opportunity to offer something to my patients that I didn't have in the state of Vermont, and it gives me the opportunity to offer something to my patients in the state of New Hampshire that's actually quite remarkable for a lot of our patients. And you also know that in states that have medical cannabis, it's been shown that there's a 25% reduction in chronic opioid use in states that have medical
actually opioid deaths.
Opioid deaths.
Opioid deaths.
Opioid deaths.
25% reduction.
So in the state of New Hampshire, we have over 400 deaths a year, I think, from opioid-related deaths. So really what we're talking about is almost 100 lives being saved just by the introduction of medical cannabis in the state. I think it's marvelous, and I thank you all for having us here, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds for us and for all of you.
I've never spoken to anybody before. My name is Jay Snell. Hopefully I'm going to be a patient. I've been on opioids now for over 2 years, and let me tell you, it's a living hell. I can tell a half an hour before I'm due for my next medication, and marijuana is not anything like that. I can smoke a joint, I can make butter, I can eat it, and I get pain relief, same as I do with the opioids, but I don't have any of the withdrawal symptoms. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Acton. I'm from Fremont, New Hampshire. I'm a veteran and a cancer survivor. More recently, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of glaucoma, which is rapidly driving me to go blind. So I am looking forward to at least being able to look into see if I can become a patient in the future. I have started a group called Patient Caregiver Alliance of New Hampshire. And what we plan to do is work cooperatively with the stakeholders of this program to make sure that the program rollout succeeds and the program in the long term accomplishes all the goals that are laid out for it. One thing I'd like to do is thank the members of HHS. I'm probably not the only fiscal conservative in this room here. This bill was not given a budget, so they had to go ahead and do this work with no budget line item to bill against. So they did nights and weekends, and they've been on each corner of the state in these last 2 weeks doing these hearings, really working hard to get this done, driven by compassion for sick people, which is the driving issue for all of us. As far as for Prime ATC guys, I'm sorry that the line of questioning earlier in any way impugned your character. I'm familiar with what happened down in Massachusetts, and it was an absolute fiasco created by poor government program rollout. To say that, to impugn your character or integrity in any way based on what happened in Massachusetts is wrong, and I apologize that even happened to you. So for the medical people and the security, I realize it takes courage to come out and support this. I've been out there. I did a 30-second commercial on MUR urging then Governor Lynch to do that, and that created a lot of consternation. It was an embarrassment for my wife, so forth. You know, it's been a struggle. I was involved through the entire process of trying to pass the legislation, and we're finally here. We want to get this done. I think the program is one of the strongest in the country as far as the laws go, and I think this is going to be a success. And thank you to people of Merrimack for allowing these guys to come in and set something up here. All right, thank you.
Good evening, Mark Doyle, Chief of Police. Just want to say thank you to all the folks at DHHS for putting this together. I think it really kind of sets the stage for the level of communication we want to have. And Brett, you hit it right on the head when you talked about really safeguarding the quality of life that we in Merrimack have worked very hard for and want to safeguard. There are a lot of interested, invested people, a lot of stakeholders that are here tonight that want to make sure that what it is that you do from the perspective of setting up your entity here in town is done so in a way that's not only in accordance with DHHS, but does just that, safeguards the quality of life that we want to maintain. The unknown is exactly that, the unknown. We don't know what will happen 5 years down the road. And from the police department's perspective, when we talk about quality of life, we just can't put a finger on that. We don't know what the legislature may do as a result of expanding either medicinal marijuana or therapeutic cannabis, whatever it is you want to call it. But we do have a real concern about what happens later. Does this lead down that road, that slippery slope, to recreational use of marijuana, which opens the door for a whole other litany of issues? Those are the kinds of things that I think we have to be cognizant of and aware of as we move forward. Now, I look forward to working with John. I look forward to working with you, Brett, and the folks on the staff and the board of directors. We even, as a member of my staff here, Lieutenant Roy, are planning on taking a field trip down to South Windsor to talk to the chief of police down there and possibly the town manager and view and walk the site itself, because there are some things that we need to know, some of the questions that we need to know about what happens after you open your doors here. And the only anecdotal evidence we can get is from their experience down there. And by all accounts, up to this point, things have been working out well. It seems like the relationship that you folks have established down there in South Windsor is one that we would look forward to having exactly here. But we won't know until we get down there. But I think it's important for folks to know where the police department stands, where I stand, notwithstanding what my personal opinion is, notwithstanding what the Chiefs of Police Association has on their agenda. But this goes deeper than that, and the folks in this town have to know that we stand to make sure whatever it is that happens is done in accordance with the quality of life that we have worked so hard to safeguard here in this town, and that we'll continue to do so. If that means working very hard and diligently with you and your folks and your team, and John from a security perspective, then you can rest assured it's going to, and I don't see why that would change. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Doyle, and I just wanted to also observe that our legislature is going to be overseeing this, and as part of the legislation, in 5 years, they are going to look at the program, whether it's been successful or not, and make a decision about its continuation or not. So the legislature is keeping a close eye on how our program is going forward, and I do think we are going to be working very closely with law enforcement and with the ATCs, and there's every reason to expect that it will be successful.
Are there any other questions or comments? I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.